Good morning and welcome to today's live event. Today we're going to be talking about engaging with your team and returning to work. So as we all know, right now we're navigating the re-entry back into our workplaces, and that's going to be very different for everybody. And effectively what we're looking at the moment is it's effectively a change management solution. We've got people who are going to be re-entering into an environment that's unfamiliar. It's not going to be the same environment that they left. It's going to operate differently. It's going to feel different. And there's going to be different people engaging in that space in a different way. So we've had to transfer everyone to move to home. And that's been a bit of a process in itself. You know, we've all had to find new ways of working. We've had to find new routines. We've engaged with different technology. We're working in a different way. And now we're going to have to effectively undo all of that and go back into the workplace environment. But when we're going back this time, there's going to be new rules. There's going to be new ways of doing things. And we've got new precautions that we're going to have to deal with because we've got a health concern that we need to address. And we need to be really mindful about how we interact in that new space. So when we've all gone home, we've established a lot of different and new routines. We've got very different habits now. And then we're going to have to go back and enter back into our workplaces. You know, most of the kids are going back to school next week. So we've got grade 1s and preppies and 11s and 12s already back at school. But next week, we're going to have all of our kids back at school. We're going to have people starting return to the workplace. So we're going to have to readjust to all of those routines again. We're probably, I know I have gotten very used to having quite slow mornings, which have been nice. I haven't had to rush to get myself ready and the kids ready for school because we've had a different, a different process about how we've got up and gone to work every day. We haven't had to deal with that commute. So there's going to be an adjustment period that we're also going to need to be really mindful of in terms of how we transition everybody back into that work environment. We're going to have to get ready again, and we're going to have to wear proper clothes and not just the top half. We're going to have to, do the whole lot. So it's going to be a really different process for everybody. And the same goes with any major change management process. There's got to be consistent communication around how that happens. But to date, what we've been doing is probably communicating quite a lot with people around what's happening and how we need to operate. But we probably haven't done a whole lot of listening. And so that's the next step that we're going to need to do in terms of understanding everyone's different perspectives and how we're going to need to accommodate everybody and support everybody as we transition them all back into that work environment and what that looks like. And it's not just going to be understanding their individual perspectives, but it's also discussing the physical practicalities. You know, we've got particular health requirements, we've got particular physical distancing that we need to accommodate, there's cleaning regimes, there's personal sanitisation that needs to occur. So there's a lot of different physical requirements that we're going to need to be looking at. And it's about understanding how different people are going to be responding to that and getting their input and understanding where they're coming from. You might even learn some things that you hadn't even considered by having those conversations and actually listening to the feedback that you're going to be getting. So there's been a lot of media hype that's been around with everything from the workplace is the next cruise ship to hot desking is dead. And I think there is an element of truth into some of those things, but there's also a reality around how our workplaces actually function and what they need to do to support us. So as I've spoken about in a number of the different previous conversations that we've had, is our workplaces are there to support us in connecting and collaborating and actually engaging in work and with each other. It's about connecting us to our organisations and who we work for and why we work for that particular organisation. You know, there's multiple different organisations for every career field. So why are we working for the organisation that we're working for? We believe in it. We believe in them. We believe in what they're doing. And so do our colleagues. And so that's where we find those communities. And that's why we're connecting in with those people on such a deeper level. So how can we continue to support that? But also, what do we need to do to ensure that people are physically safe and healthy at that point as well? So it's going to be a big shift, I think, in terms of how our workplaces actually operate and the relationship that we have with our work environments and the reason that we go there every day. If I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to have to get myself dressed and going out into the world and I'm exposing myself to potential harmful viruses and things, the place that I'm going to needs to be pretty awesome. It needs to be somewhere that I'm really excited about going. I feel like I get value out of being there rather than it being somewhere that I just need to go and sit every day. And so by understanding how your team is feeling about that, you're going to be able to understand you know, what it is that's going to excite them about getting back to work. You know, what is it the purpose of them wanting to get back to work, and how are we going to facilitate that? And that's going to happen through consultation. And the best way to do that is you ask them. So whether you do that through focus groups and interview sessions, or how you want to manage that, but the first thing we need to do is actually ask people how they feel about returning to work. And you're going to find that those responses are going to be really, really varied, because everyone's going to have a different perspective about why they need to return to the workplace and when. So we need to be looking at who needs to go back to the workplace and why. So if you're an individual and you're needing to go back to the work environment, that might be because of your own personal circumstances at home. You might have young children at home. You might have really poor internet quality. You know, working from home might have been really, really difficult for you because of your personal situation. Now, we've all had kids at home, but some of those people are going to have that those children at home beyond return to school because of the age of those children. So being conscious of what the personal situations of your individual team members are and why they may need to actually return to work. It might also be something to do with a task or a role description. So you might be in a support team, such as a finance or a legal or HR administration types role, and your team are there to support everyone else in the organisation. So there needs to be a representative from that team available to engage with the rest of the workforce as they return to the work environment. So it's about understanding the different roles, looking at the different, oh, thanks, Rhiannon, you agree with my points there, I appreciate that. I think that's really going to be a point that we need to be understanding is what is the situation for each of us individually, and why do we actually need to go back to the work environment, and what does that need to look like for each of us, and how can we support that? So if we've then identified these particular groups that are needing to return into the work environment, what we might then start to understand is that the previous workplace setup doesn't actually facilitate or support that number of people returning to the workforce. So let's assume that all of our HR, legal and finance team needs to return, but with the physical distancing that we need to accommodate, the way that they were positioned and accommodated in the previous workplace environment doesn't suit. So we're going to have to look at how we reallocate seating to support those teams returning to the work environment, and how they then integrate with everyone else in that particular environment. And you need to then understand who actually wants to come in and how often do they want to come in. So as I said, there might be people who can't work at home, or you might find that there are particular teams that are really energized off engaging with others. Introverts versus extroverts. You know, if you're an introvert, you're probably really enjoying this time at home because you're not having to connect and talk to people. But if you're an extrovert, this time has been most difficult for you because you're not feeding off that energy of other people. So the ability to come into the work environment, connect with others, energize yourself, and then actually collaborate with other people so that you can revitalize your own tank and your own reserves so that you can then go home and perform better. We need to look at how that needs to happen. But then what are those activities that people are going to be doing when they get into the workplace so that we can create spaces that support that? Now, my personal view is that workplace environments are not there for us to go and sit on our bums 9 to 5 and actually do our work. We've identified that we can do that anywhere. We can work at home. We can do that with the technology and the ability and the flexibility that we've been given through this time. But there are particular activities that we need to actually go into the workplace to do, and that's largely around how we communicate and connect with each other. I know particularly in our team, we get so energized by being in the office together, because what we do is we're collaborating, we're brainstorming, we're connecting, we're ideating, we're creating all of these new concepts around what we actually want to do, and then we disperse and we go and do it. We don't sit in the desk beside each other and just do our work. That's not fulfilling for us. It's about that energy that's created by us actually connecting and collaborating. So to do that, the type of environment that people are going to need to support those types of activities is going to be very, very different. It isn't a workstation. It's meeting spaces, it's collaboration spaces, it's whiteboards, it's technology, it's screens, it's lounging areas. So those sorts of spaces are going to be in much higher demand, because the reason we're coming into the workplace is to connect, and we need to facilitate that with the types of furniture we're supporting them with in terms of the behaviours that we want to see. So how do we actually go about bringing people back into that work environment. And I think there are a few things that we need to consider. My personal thought is that it shouldn't be on a week on, week off rotation. And the reason that is because I'm then having to adjust to an environment for a longer period of time, only to have that disrupted again. So if I'm going into the office and I'm setting myself up and I'm then get into that routine of going to the office every week, and then all of a sudden the next week I don't do that, I've then got to readjust to working from home again. I've got to readjust to a different routine. Whereas if we're doing it on a 2 days, 3 days kind of rotation, what we're starting to see is that we're actually getting used to being mobile, and we're never getting really settled into a particular environment or a particular routine and set of habits, because we're then much more adaptable. Different organisations are going to have different views on this because of cleaning regimes and different things that are going to support them and how teams need to come together and interact. But I personally feel that having everyone together for 1 week and then having them everyone off at side again for another week is going to be far more disruptive than if we can integrate this on a much more consistent level throughout the different weeks. Looking at your utilisation too. Now, this is going to be a little bit more difficult because physically can't measure and manage what's happening at the moment, but looking back and historically reviewing things. So a utilisation study is looking at how spaces are being used in your organisation and how often. So you typically would look at how often a workstation is occupied at 3 points through the day over a period of a few weeks to get a balance of what the percentage of utilisation of that particular environment is. Same with meeting rooms, breakout spaces, cafe environments, all those sorts of things. We're looking at how often spaces are actually used. So I think you need to do a little bit of retrospective analysis. It might mean that you need to get a few people together and have a conversation around this, but identify how your space was actually being used previously, and then think about how it's going to be used going forward, because it is going to be different. How are you going to need to change your space going forward to accommodate these new different types of work environments that people are going to need for the reasons that they're actually going to be coming into the office, because those reasons are going to be very different to what they were before we had to all go home. So the key factor in all of this is around engagement. And when we can engage with our team, we can demonstrate how much we actually care about them. And when we feel like we're being cared about, we're going to feel much more empathetic towards the situation that we're actually sitting in at the moment. So we've probably all had to look at reduced hours. We looked at, employment reductions. Some people might have had pay cuts. You may even have colleagues that have been made redundant through this period of time. So there's going to be a high level of sensitivity around all of this in terms of how we return to that work environment. But I think it's really important to be proactive about how you engage in these conversations. Rather than waiting for your team to come to you and have a conversation around the situation that they're feeling at the moment, it's actually quite important, I think, for you to engage with them and be proactive around asking how they're feeling, listening to what their concerns are, and then working together to find a solution that's going to work for both the organisation and for the individual. Because as I said, we're all going to have different situations. You need to understand their readiness. And I think that's going to come down to how we empathise with our people and how we go through a process of connecting with them and then understanding what their particular situations are and their individual fears. Because as I said, we're going to all have a very different perspective on this, and my perspective is going to be very different to your perspective. As I said in last week's live, I'm not particularly concerned by germs and viruses and things like that. Like, that's just my personal nature, but that's very different to how everyone else may be reacting. And I also don't have any personal health ailments that would have me to have any cause for concern either. But that's not the same for everybody. There are different people with different levels of health and also very real concerns for them as to how much exposure they're going to be having. So we need to understand how they're feeling, how prepared are they to return to the work environment, and, do they even want to come back at all? Now, this is a big conversation, and I've seen a lot of media reports around this and the obligations of the employer and the obligations of the employee, and that's something that, you need to investigate. But what is the situation for that individual? Do they not actually feel safe at all coming back into the work environment? And how do we then accommodate that? listening to all of their concerns and really just understanding how they're feeling, and then being able to communicate back to them all the actions that are actually being taken. Now, most organisations are developing a return to work strategy around cleaning policies, number of people in the office, rotational rosters, all of those things. But being able to communicate that to your employees then around what's happening, how it's happening, and if it's not happening yet, where does it sit on that roadmap for return to entry? How are we going to be accommodating that and addressing that going forward if we're not actually addressing it right now? And that may well be a real case as well. So the big thing around this is that we're communicating the process that's being followed, the information that we're working off in terms of actually responding to those processes, and then measuring that regularly. So doing pulse checks, getting feedback from your team, reviewing that feedback, and then addressing that feedback and adapting your plan to respond to that, but communicating that, how you're adapting that, communicating that you've heard the feedback, that you're taking these actions as a result, and how that's going to address that feedback that you've been receiving as you move forward. One of the other things that we've been talking about in our team is, checking in on your middle managers. So your middle managers are going to be new to management. They're not familiar with these kinds of situations, as most of us aren't, but some of us have actually got much, much more years of experience under our belt to be able to adapt and manage in these particular situations. They're relatively inexperienced. This is going to be something that's going to be quite stressful for them. It's very new. So checking in on them and seeing how they're going, and seeing how they're actually going with managing and working remotely, because most of us work under a management system where we sit in our offices with our colleagues and we can see. So we manage by presenteeism as opposed to managing by task and outcome. And so this is a very different situation that people have been working in. And it's going to be interesting to see how we then transition back into the workplace, where we're going to then have a mix of presenteeism and outcome-based objectives. And because we've kind of really been a bit more lenient in these times, because we've been dealing with a lot of different issues on a much wider scale, how is that then going to transition when we go back into the work environment? Are we going to see people just returning to old management styles, or are we going to be adapting some of the things that we've learned through this period to then improve our workplace environments as we go forward? So the other big thing that I would like to highlight is around celebrating successes. As I said, this has been quite a challenging time for all of us, and no doubt we have achieved some pretty amazing things through this period of time. I know our team have. We've pulled out all the stops and we have kicked some massive goals through this period. But it's about acknowledging that and then celebrating it, both individually and collectively as a team. How are you acknowledging that publicly? How is the rest of the business being informed of these successes that particular teams may be achieving or particular individuals are achieving? And I think it's something that we often don't celebrate, and we don't do it deliberately. It's quite inadvertently. We get busy with other things and we forget to actually celebrate the successes. So I think being conscious of that and actually acknowledging that, going back into our workplace environments and then taking the opportunity to celebrate these things publicly will help instill a great sense of motivation and morale building as we come back to our work environments. We've also spoken quite a bit around the habits that many of us are forming, and I noticed Katie started a poll on this yesterday in our Facebook group. And what are some of the things that you have done during this period? What are some habits that you've created that you've actually enjoyed and you don't want to lose when you return to the work environment? And one of the most popular ones out of the poll was around meditation and mindfulness, and just having that space and time to be more mindful of how things are happening for you and having that space. My personal thing has been the slower mornings, like not having to rush and get all the kids to school and get myself to work and be there by this time. I've actually spoken to my team about starting later in the day, because I then don't have to run around like a mad lady to get all of the kids to school, and then I come to work and I'm stressed and things are overwhelming. It's just taking a slower pace and having some time for me to set myself up for the day and being conscious of how that works. And I'm going to show up as a much better person because I'm in a much more relaxed state of being generally. And so, what are the things that have made you feel like a better person? And how do you want to make sure that you keep those things as you move back into the work environment so that you can continue to feel like being this better version of yourself? Because that's going to be really important, because you're then going to bring that better person to work and you're going to perform better. So having that conversation with your team, and if you're a team member, how are we having that conversation with our managers? Because as a smaller team, you might not be comfortable returning to the work environment, and you're not comfortable speaking up because you're in this minority in your team. So finding ways to find that courage to have that conversation is going to be really important to helping you adapt and move back into the whole process. So that return to work process is really going to be giving us an opportunity that I sincerely hope we never have again, because this situation has been very unique. It's unlikely we'll have this opportunity again, and I sincerely hope we don't, because no one wants to be through what we've been through. No one wants to go through a pandemic again, and certainly not in my lifetime. But we are now presented with some really amazing opportunities, and it's a great time to sit back and reflect on those and identify how we want to take that forward. You know, what are those new norms that we want to create? What do we want to embrace? And what do we want to take forward from those opportunities? And how are we really going to drive new ways of working so that we can create the most amazing employee experience in our organisation? That's going to hold us in much greater stead going forward in terms of employee attraction and retention, because we are going to be an amazing place to work for, because we have these fantastic new norms and ways of working in our organisations. So look at how you can co-create that with your team so that you are creating a really amazing place to work. So remember that getting back to work is going to create a new rhythm. It's basically, we're having to relearn all of those processes. We had to learn all of these processes on how to work from home, and now we're going to have to learn all of these processes and how we get back to work again. So it is going to take some time to adjust. So be gentle on yourself, be gentle on your team, because it is going to be challenging. We're all having to remember how to get out of bed, how to get dressed, how to get in the car, how to take the kids to school. And all of that is actually going to happen in 1 week. For me, my daughter goes back to school next week, and it's going to have to learn how to do all of that again. And it's a little bit daunting, if I'm honest. I'm a little bit anxious about the whole process because it's a rush. And I want to take some time to kind of adjust for that myself too, and find how I can rebalance back into that slow morning for me, and what that new slow morning looks like if I've got to get the kids to school and then get myself to work. So looking at how that changes. So there's a return to work journey that we've created, and it looks at both the physical and the behavioural changes that we will need to adopt as we return to work. It illustrates 3 steps that we would take organisations through. It's around empathising with people. It's about co-creating. How do we recreate a new normal, and how do we do that together as a team, because we're all going to bring different perspectives to the table. And then how do we adapt? So we can adapt what we have from a space perspective, from an organisational perspective. How do we adapt what we already have and the ways that we already operate to accommodate these new requirements and these new norms? So looking at empathising, co-creating and adapting. Now, we've got a toolkit that we've created, and I'm more than happy to share that with you, and also share with you how to go through that empathizing process. How do you engage with your team? What are the kinds of questions you need to be asking? So if you do want a copy of that toolkit, just send me an email. It's melissa@comuniti.com.au, and I'll be more than happy to share that toolkit with you. If you are on Facebook Live, please come across and join us in if you're on Instagram Live, please come across and join us in the Facebook group. It's Community Dialogue. There's some great resources that we share in there, as well as some great conversations that are happening. We'd love you to contribute to those conversations as well. And all the recordings from our previous Facebook Lives are also in the Facebook group there for you to access. But there's some really great resources in there, and we'd really encourage you to come in and connect with us on that. And if you do want further information on how you can support your teams in returning to work, send me that email and I'd be more than happy to share those resources with you. So if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, or if there is anything that you would like to contribute to this morning's conversation, please just drop it in the comments box. I'd love to hear from you. We've got a few people online this morning. So good morning, Elise. Thanks for joining us again. And hi, Paula. Nice to see you. Well, not physically see you, but nice of you to join me. Appreciate that. Morning, Tim. How you going? We've got Katie in Atlanta, and Ryan and Bash, hello. But if anyone's got any questions, oh, Elise is waving. Hi, Elise. If you have any questions, please also feel free to just send me a message through the Facebook group. Always in there, happy to chat and connect. And I hope everyone has a wonderful morning and enjoys the rest of their week. So thanks for joining us, guys. I'll see you later. Bye.